She thought leaving him would be the end of it. She changed addresses. She blocked his number. She filed police reports. She even got a restraining order. But none of it stopped him. On February 21st, 2021, in broad daylight on the south side of Chicago, Larry Sistrunk returned. Not just to confront his ex, Lasonya Agee, but to eliminate her. He brought a gun. He fired 11 times. Lasonya was hit repeatedly. Arms, legs, stomach, chest. Her grandmother and uncle were also shot. The attack was swift and methodical. And standing just a few feet away, her 3-year-old son watched the entire scene unfold. This wasn't a random crime. It was a result of months of stalking, threats, and ignored warnings.
10, the chilling story of what's happened to another Chicago mother. She was shot 11 times in a cold-blooded shooting. She is thankful to be alive and tonight demands some answers.
Lasonya had taken every step a domestic violence survivor is told to take, yet the system meant to protect her failed. What happens when someone tries to escape an abusive relationship and ends up nearly murdered in front of their family? What happens when the same man had already been reported multiple times and nothing was done? This case raises serious questions about how domestic violence is handled, how restraining orders are enforced, and how law enforcement responds to repeat offenders. Lasonya survived, but barely. Her survival wasn't because of any protective measure. It was a result of luck, timing, and trauma surgeons. In this episode, we break down the relationship, the red flags, the timeline leading to the attack, and what happened after the shots were fired. This is the case of Lasonya Agee, a mother, a survivor, and a witness to how fast things can turn deadly when no one listens. And the one witness who remembers it all is still just a child. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds. Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Lasonya Agee is a lifelong resident of Chicago, Illinois. She is known within her community as a devoted mother and family-oriented woman. Her day-to-day life was focused on raising her young son and supporting her elderly relatives, specifically her grandmother and uncle, with whom she shared a strong bond. She had no public criminal record, no known history of violence, and no media presence prior to the incident that brought her name into headlines. She worked to provide a stable life for her child. Her employment history includes retail jobs and part-time caregiving. She was not publicly involved in activism or community leadership. Friends and acquaintances describe her as quiet, private, and focused on her family. She did not openly discuss her personal struggles with most people in her life. Her lifestyle was modest, and she kept a low profile. Lasonya was not known to frequently date or engage in high-profile relationships. Her interactions with others were generally limited to family members and trusted individuals. She had no public history of drug or alcohol abuse and was not involved in any ongoing legal battles prior to the situation with Larry Sistrunk. Her young son, whose name is not disclosed for privacy reasons, is a biological child of Larry Sistrunk. The child lived primarily with Lasonya. There was no confirmed joint custody arrangement filed through the court. Sistrunk had no formal visitation schedule. Lasonya acted as a child's sole guardian and caregiver for the majority of the boy's life. While Sistrunk is the biological father, he played a limited and increasingly dangerous role in the child's life as the relationship deteriorated. Larry Sistrunk was also a resident of Chicago. He had a known criminal history and was involved in multiple incidents prior to the attack on Lasonya Agee. Records show prior arrests related to domestic incidents, although some charges were dropped or not prosecuted due to lack of evidence or victim cooperation. His background includes accusations of harassment, controlling behavior, and physical violence in past relationships. Sistrunk had a reputation for being charming in public settings. He was described as charismatic, well-dressed, and outwardly composed. He was not known to be employed in any stable or long-term profession. Reports suggest inconsistent work history and potential involvement in illegal activities, although this was never formally verified through charges. There are no records of Sistrunk pursuing higher education or maintaining a consistent address. His living situation fluctuated between temporary stays with relatives, romantic partners, and short-term rentals. He often used instability to manipulate and isolate romantic partners. He was known to law enforcement. Police reports over the years included complaints from various women, but few resulted in convictions. Sistrunk had a pattern of entering relationships quickly, isolating partners from their social networks, and escalating to violence or threats when control was threatened. Lasonya Agee and Larry Sistrunk met several years prior to the incident. They connected through mutual acquaintances in Chicago. At the time of their meeting, Lasonya was seeking stability and was working part-time while taking care of her grandmother. Sistrunk presented himself as confident, supportive, and attentive. He made an effort to appear dependable during the early phase of their interaction. Their relationship started gradually. Early encounters involved typical dating behavior, dinners, conversations, and emotional bonding. Sistrunk showed no immediate red flags in public settings. He avoided confrontation in front of others and worked to build Lasonya's trust. Over time, they began spending more time together and eventually cohabitated in a shared residence. Lasonya became pregnant during the course of the relationship. The pregnancy was not planned, but she chose to keep the child and take on the responsibilities of motherhood. Sistrunk initially expressed support, but over time, his behavior shifted. His involvement in the child's life began to fluctuate, and conflicts over parenting began to emerge. There was no legal custody agreement or formal child support filed. All arrangements were informal and based on Lasonya's willingness to allow contact. Once the relationship was established, signs of control began to appear. Sistrunk began monitoring Lasonya's phone calls, questioning her whereabouts, and demanding access to her social media. Friends were gradually cut off from her life. Lasonya did not immediately identify these behaviors as abuse, but took note of the increasing restrictions. The first known instance of physical violence occurred after the child was born. Sistrunk assaulted Lasonya during a private argument in their home. No police report was filed at that time. She did not disclose the incident to friends or family. Over the next few months, the abuse escalated in both frequency and intensity. Emotional abuse became routine. Sistrunk belittled her, accused her of cheating, and controlled finances. Psychological abuse also intensified. He stalked her, showed up uninvited at locations, and made veiled threats. At one point, he was discovered hiding in the trunk of her car in an attempt to follow her movements. These actions created an ongoing state of fear for Lasonya. Lasonya attempted to set boundaries. She asked him to move out and told him to stop contacting her. Sistrunk ignored these requests. When she changed her phone number, he obtained a new one through mutual contacts. He created fake social media accounts to monitor her. When blocked, he used third parties to relay messages. Lasonya Agee's relationship with Larry Sistrunk followed a familiar and escalating pattern of intimate partner violence. What started as a seemingly stable relationship gradually devolved into a toxic cycle marked by physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. Over time, the behavior became more dangerous, more obsessive, and more difficult to escape. The abuse manifested in multiple forms. Physically, Lasonya endured direct assaults and threats of violence. These attacks were not limited to single events. They occurred repeatedly over a period of time. Each instance further reinforced Sistrunk's control. There were times when he would physically strike her. Other times, he would threaten to do so in order to keep her from leaving, speaking out, or involving others. The physical abuse was a method of enforcement, used to maintain submission and silence. Emotionally, Sistrunk employed manipulation, belittling, and psychological control. He used tactics that made Lasonya question her self-worth. He minimized her experiences, accused her of lying, and isolated her from support systems. He likely alternated between false apologies and renewed aggression, a tactic common in abusive relationships, where manipulation is used to confuse and destabilize the victim. His control extended to her decision-making, movement, and communication. The psychological abuse was more covert, but equally damaging. Stalking was a key feature of this dynamic. After the relationship deteriorated and Lasonya attempted to leave, Sistrunk began following her. He showed up uninvited, hid in her vehicle, and appeared at known locations where she conducted her daily activities. His intimidation created a persistent sense of surveillance and threat. The fear-based tactics include aggressive phone calls, verbal harassment, and sudden appearances that reinforce her feeling of being hunted. These behaviors followed a clear pattern of escalation. In the early stages of the relationship, the red flags were either dismissed, hidden, or unrecognizable. Emotional manipulation was subtle. Verbal arguments may have appeared normal to outside observers. But as time went on, the frequency and severity of the abuse increased. The physical attacks became more violent, the psychological pressure more constant, the stalking more intrusive. Lasonya likely attempted to normalize some of this behavior in order to function. As with many abuse victims, the instinct to survive often includes downplaying warning signs until they become undeniable. Over time, Sistrunk's behavior became less predictable. His reactions escalated without warning. He shifted from verbal outbursts to physical violence. He went from threats to actual stalking. The transition from abuser to active threat happened gradually but decisively. In public, Lasonya did not show signs of being a victim. She maintained a composed, functional appearance. Friends and acquaintances saw her as quiet, strong, and private. These traits masked the severity of what she was experiencing. The abuse occurred in private settings, often in her home or during interactions away from others. Because she rarely spoke about her personal struggles, no one outside the immediate situation saw the full picture. The outward normalcy allowed Sistrunk's behavior to continue unchecked. It also made it difficult for others to intervene. Only in hindsight did some friends recognize subtle behavioral changes, such as increased isolation or guarded speech, that indicated she was in danger. As the abuse escalated, Lasonya Agee took formal steps to protect herself. She did not ignore the danger. She reported multiple incidents to law enforcement. These reports created a legal record of Sistrunk's behavior. She filed for and obtained restraining orders. She engaged the criminal justice system in an effort to place legal distance between herself and her abuser. These actions were direct and procedural. She attempted to use the system as a barrier. She also documented threats and specific incidents. This likely included collecting phone call logs, messages, and incident reports. Her efforts were intended to establish a pattern of behavior that would legally justify ongoing protection. These documents may have been used in court or filed as evidence. They demonstrate that she was actively trying to escape, not passively enduring the situation. In addition to legal action, Lasonya made physical changes to her life. She moved out of the shared home she had with Sistrunk. This was a key step in distancing herself. She attempted to cut off all contact with him. This likely included blocking phone numbers, avoiding familiar locations, and severing personal connections that could link them. She may have relocated or changed her daily routines. This form of separation is one of the most dangerous periods for domestic violence victims, as often triggers the abuser's most aggressive behavior. As part of her personal safety strategy, Lasonya implemented protective measures. She did not publicly broadcast the abuse. She refrained from discussing it openly on social media or in group settings. This was likely done to reduce exposure and avoid retaliation. She shielded her child and her elderly relatives from the direct conflict. She deliberately kept them uninvolved, both to protect them from emotional stress and to prevent them from becoming targets. She also developed private precautions. These may have included varying her travel routes, avoiding certain locations, and installing security features at her residence. She may have coordinated with friends to check in on her, or kept emergency contacts on alert. She tried to create a buffer between herself and Sistrunk without attracting attention. Her movements were calculated to reduce the chance of confrontation. Despite these efforts, the danger did not subside. Sistrunk continued his pursuit. His behavior became more aggressive and erratic. He violated restraining orders. He harassed her by phone and in person. He hid in her vehicle, a clear escalation that demonstrated intent to confront or harm her. The stalking, threats, and unpredictable behavior signaled that he was not going to let go. All of Lasonya's protective measures were taken within the scope of what the law and personal safety planning could offer. She followed the known procedures for victims of domestic violence. But the measures in place were not enough to prevent what eventually occurred. The legal system documented the abuse, but did not neutralize the threat. The stalking incident served as warnings, but no effective preemptive action was taken. Her relocation and silence protected her family for a time, but it did not insulate them from the eventual violence. The situation culminated not because she failed to act, but because her abuser escalated beyond control. Every effort Lasonya made to create distance, protection, and legal barriers ultimately exposed the limits of those systems when confronted by a determined offender. The attack that followed was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was a final stage in a clearly documented and escalating cycle of abuse. After separating from Larry Sistrunk, Lasonya Agee attempted to rebuild her life in silence. She had already filed reports and obtained restraining orders through the court system, seeking legal protection to keep Sistrunk away. These protective measures were documented, court-approved, and intended to enforce distance between them. However, they failed to serve their purpose. Sistrunk violated these orders repeatedly, despite the clear restrictions placed upon him. Sistrunk continued contacting Lasonya without regard for legal consequences. He disregarded the law and initiated unwanted contact, which constituted multiple violations. The harassment didn't remain passive. He escalated his efforts through physical presence and calculated behavior designed to instill fear and control. In one confirmed incident, Sistrunk hid in the trunk of Lasonya's car. This event demonstrated not only a physical violation of space, but also premeditation. Hiding in the trunk required planning, timing, and knowledge of Lasonya's movements. It also revealed an intent to ambush her directly, catching her by surprise in a vulnerable moment. This was not a spontaneous act. It was a strategic form of intimidation. Sistrunk also demonstrated awareness of Lasonya's daily schedule. He showed up at places he knew she would be, locations where she felt safe or expected routine. He used his knowledge to confront her or observe her without consent. The frequency and accuracy of these appearances indicated active monitoring of her life. These were not chance encounters. They were deliberate intrusions. Beyond his physical presence, Sistrunk maintained consistent digital harassment. He called her phone repeatedly. He sent texts. He issued threats. Each contact was an attempt to break boundaries she had legally set. Despite the restraining orders, no enforcement occurred before the final incident. The legal system failed to stop the communication. In addition to phone harassment, Sistrunk made in-person confrontations. He approached her physically despite court mandates against doing so. These confrontations were not isolated. They followed a pattern of persistence and escalation. Each contact, whether verbal or physical, reinforced the level of control he believed he still had over her. The consistent nature of the harassment reflected a larger psychological profile, one of obsession. Sistrunk's behavior did not fit the profile of a former partner, simply unwilling to let go. His actions pointed toward deep-seated possessiveness. Even after their relationship ended, he maintained a mental and emotional claim over Lasonya. This possessiveness was visible in how he monitored her, attempted to control her decisions, and insert himself into her daily life. The obsession grew in intensity. His behavior escalated in both frequency and risk. Hiding in a vehicle, violating court orders, tracking her movements, and threatening her repeatedly were all part of control escalation pattern. These actions suggested he was not simply reacting in the moment. He was planning. While these incidents were happening, Lasonya remained cautious. She changed routines regularly. She did not follow predictable patterns if she could help it. She likely altered school pickup times or work routes to avoid detection. These were not just lifestyle adjustments. They were necessary safety strategies. The goal was to minimize the chances of running into Sistrunk or being tracked. Even as she modified her life, Lasonya maintained silence about the full extent of the danger. She did not tell her grandmother or her uncle everything. She shielded them from the specifics, possibly to avoid causing them distress or bringing conflict into their lives. Her silence was strategic. It was a form of protection. The same approach applied to her son. As a mother, she worked to shield him from witnessing the violence, threats, and tension that surrounded their lives. She compartmentalized the abuse. The goal was to ensure that his day-to-day experience remained as normal as possible, despite what she faced. However, despite her attempt to isolate the problem and protect those around her, the threat continued to grow. Legal action had done nothing to stop Sistrunk. Reporting him did not change his behavior. Filing for restraining orders created documents, not boundaries. With each violation, her confidence in the system diminished. She understood that she was alone in managing the danger. The fear increased over time. With each stalking event, phone call, or surprise confrontation, she recognized the risk of a future violent outcome. The warning signs were present. The history of behavior was consistent. The legal mechanisms in place were ineffective. She began to consider the possibility that Sistrunk would not stop until something irreversible occurred. There was a growing awareness that this would not end with distance or legal documentation. It might end in violence. This fear was not abstract. It was based on a pattern of actions that showed a clear disregard for the law, her safety, and the well-being of her family. As time passed, Lasonya's situation became more precarious. Her quiet nature and private lifestyle meant few people knew the extent of the danger. She was surrounded by people who cared about her, but remained unaware of the severity of the situation. Her silence, while protective, also left her isolated. The failure of protective measures, the predictable pattern of escalation, and the lack of external intervention contributed directly to the events that would eventually unfold. Sistrunk's obsession had grown unchecked. He demonstrated the willingness to go to extreme lengths, both logistically and psychologically, to maintain control over someone who had clearly chosen to leave him. By the time the violence erupted, the groundwork had already been laid through months or years of stalking, harassment, and failed intervention. What happened was not a spontaneous outburst. It was a planned culmination of behavior that had been visible in advance to anyone closely watching. Lasonya Agee, 25 years old at the time, had been in a long-term relationship with Larry Sistrunk, her ex-boyfriend. The relationship had turned abusive over time, emotionally, physically, and psychologically. Lasonya had taken legal steps to protect herself, including filing police reports and obtaining a restraining order. She had also moved out of their shared residence in an attempt to start over and provide a safer life for her son. Despite these efforts, Larry Sistrunk continued to stalk and harass her. He had previously hidden in the trunk of her car. He called her obsessively and appeared at her home uninvited. Law enforcement was aware of these incidents, but the threats persisted. On the day of the incident, Lasonya went to visit her family, specifically her grandmother and uncle. Her 3-year-old son was also with her. The close-knit family often gathered together, providing emotional support for each other. They were unaware of the immediate threat Sistrunk posed that day. Lasonya had not disclosed the full extent of the danger to them. At some point during the visit, Lasonya exited her vehicle in front of her grandmother's residence. Sistrunk approached her outside, trying to convince her to get into his car. She refused. His tone escalated. Moments later, he retrieved a handgun and opened fire. Lasonya was struck 11 times. Her grandmother and uncle, who were nearby, were also shot. The shots were fired at close range. The attack occurred in broad daylight. Lasonya's 3-year-old son witnessed the entire event. He was not physically harmed, but was present for the entire incident. Neighbors called 911 immediately after the shots rang out. When emergency responders arrived, they found 3 adult victims suffering from gunshot wounds. All were transported to local hospitals. Lasonya underwent extensive surgery and survived despite the severity of her injuries. Her grandmother and uncle also survived but required medical treatment. Sistrunk fled the scene immediately after the shooting. A short time later, he appeared on Facebook Live, speaking about the incident and making statements that law enforcement would later consider in the case against him. In the video, he made remarks indicating remorse and confusion, but the fact showed a deliberate and targeted act of violence. Chicago police quickly identified Sistrunk as the primary suspect. A manhunt was launched. He was located and arrested without incident. Authorities charged him with multiple counts, including attempted murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, and unlawful use of a weapon. The scene of the crime was secured, and investigators collected ballistic evidence. Witnesses, including family members and neighbors, provided statements. Surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses was reviewed. The case was considered a domestic violence incident that escalated into a multi-victim shooting. The shooting was not random. It was premeditated and directed specifically at Lasonya and the people closest to her. Investigators concluded that Sistrunk's motive was rooted in control and retaliation. Lasonya had tried to leave and take back her life. By targeting her and her family, Sistrunk demonstrated a desire to exert dominance and punishment. Larry Sistrunk was charged with multiple serious offenses in connection with the February 21st, 2021, shooting involving Lasonya Agee, her grandmother, and her uncle. The charges included attempted first-degree murder for the premeditated shooting of Lasonya Agee, who was struck 11 times, aggravated battery with firearm for causing bodily harm to Lasonya's grandmother and uncle, aggravated discharge of firearm for firing a weapon in a manner that endangered multiple individuals, unlawful use of a weapon by a felon for possessing and using a firearm despite a prior felony conviction, violation of an order of protection for contacting and approaching Lasonya despite an active restraining order. These charges reflect the severity and premeditated nature of the attack, as well as Sistrunk's disregard for legal boundaries and prior court orders. The presence of a child at the scene added further weight to the charges. The trauma sustained by the child, while not physical, was significant. Authorities later confirmed the child was placed in safe care following the incident. The attack served as a clear escalation of a pattern that had been unfolding over months. All of the warning signs, stalking, prior threats, controlling behavior, had been present. Protective orders and separation had failed to deter the perpetrator. Following the attack, Lasonya spoke to media outlets from her hospital bed. She described what happened in clear detail. Her story became part of a broader conversation about domestic violence, stalking, and the need for stronger intervention systems. Public interest in the case grew as more details emerged about the timeline leading up to the shooting. In court proceedings, prosecutors presented evidence that showed the planning involved in the attack. The gun used had been acquired in advance. Witnesses stated that Sistrunk had spoken previously about harming Lasonya. His own video recording after the shooting corroborated intent. Lasonya's survival required extensive medical intervention, physical therapy, and long-term emotional recovery. Her family members also faced lengthy healing processes. The legal case against Sistrunk continued in Cook County Court, with several continuations and hearings related to the nature of the charges. To date, the case stands as a documented example of how domestic violence can extend beyond the primary victim to impact entire families, even children. Lasonya's efforts to seek help, set boundaries, and protect her child did not prevent the violent outcome. The system failed to fully neutralize the threat, despite the red flags. The investigation concluded that the shooting was the result of persistent and unchecked domestic abuse, culminating in an attempt to kill not only the target, but her emotional support network. After being shot 11 times by her abusive ex-boyfriend, Lasonya Agee survived. The attack left her with multiple injuries across her body. Emergency medical responders arrived at the scene and transported her to the hospital in critical condition. Doctors conducted numerous surgeries to stabilize her. She required extended hospitalization, followed by long-term physical therapy. The recovery process likely involved internal damage, nerve pain, mobility challenges, and frequent medical supervision. She lived, but with injuries that would remain with her. Her survival was considered miraculous by first responders and medical personnel due to the number and placement of the gunshot wounds. However, surviving the physical damage was only one part of the aftermath. The trauma from the event extended far beyond her injuries. Lasonya had witnessed the attempted murder of her family members. She had lived through the collapse of her safety net, despite trying for years to protect herself and those around her. Her grandmother and uncle had been shot alongside her, people she had tried to keep away from the escalating abuse. The betrayal by a man she once trusted and the scale of his retaliation made the psychological fallout more complex. Her son, who witnessed the shooting, became a secondary victim of the attack. Watching his mother and relatives shot at close range would likely create long-lasting psychological consequences. This exposure to extreme violence at a young age may result in PTSD symptoms, behavioral changes, or difficulty processing safety and trust. Even if he did not suffer physical injury, the mental impact would be severe and long-term. The child would now carry the memory of that day as part of his development. For the surviving family, including extended relatives and community members, the attack caused shock and reevaluation of how such incidents unfold. The narrative was no longer private. It became public, forcing everyone close to Lasonya to confront the details of the abuse she had been enduring. Law enforcement involvement increased immediately after the shooting. A triple shooting involving a domestic violence suspect who had already been reported to authorities prompted additional investigations. Police revisited prior reports, protective orders, and evidence submitted by Lasonya. These included past complaints of stalking, the incident of the suspect hiding in her vehicle, and records of verbal threats. Authorities re-examined their response to Lasonya's warnings. The failure to prevent the attack raised questions about enforcement procedures. Officers may have reviewed body camera footage, dispatch records, and protection order compliance records. Prosecutors evaluated whether more could have been done to detain or monitor the suspect prior to the shooting. The case attracted media attention due to the brutality of the crime and the context surrounding it. Media outlets covered the story as a cautionary tale, one where restraining orders and formal complaints were not enough to stop the violence. Reporters focused on the timeline of events, examining how long Lasonya had been reporting her ex-boyfriend's behavior and how each step escalated without sufficient intervention. The case became symbolic of a larger issue, the inability of legal systems to stop domestic abusers before they turn lethal. Victim advocates began citing Lasonya's case in broader discussions about intimate partner violence, IPV. Her story was used to push for changes in protective legislation, improve enforcement of restraining orders, and increase funding for survivor protection programs. It highlighted systemic failures at every level. Lasonya had done what victims are advised to do. She reported the abuse, filed protection orders, and physically left the abuser. But none of these steps prevented the attack. Despite clear warning signs, including stalking, hiding in her car, and repeated harassment, the violence escalated. This event exposed how dangerous an abuser can become when control is lost. Lasonya's attempt to escape did not end the cycle. Instead, it intensified it. The attack proved that legal documents alone are not always effective deterrents, especially against individuals willing to cross every boundary. The case also revealed common patterns found in escalating IPV cases. The abuser used classic control tactics, emotional manipulation, threats, stalking, and isolation. Each behavior followed a trajectory that led to the ultimate act of violence. By the time of the shooting, the progression from psychological control to physical assault to attempted murder had completed its course. What began as toxic behaviors behind closed doors ended in a multi-victim shooting. The violence had a multi-generational impact. It did not stop at Lasonya. Her grandmother, uncle, and son were all drawn into a conflict that originated with an intimate partner. This demonstrated how IPV can extend far beyond two people. Once the abuser felt he had lost control over Lasonya, he expanded his violence to anyone connected to her. The attack became not just personal, it became expansive and retaliatory. When examining the events in hindsight, patterns become visible. Warning signs were present. The stalking behavior was not hidden. The threats were reported. The system received multiple opportunities to intervene. Yet the final act of violence still occurred. These patterns, when viewed collectively, tell a larger story, one of predictable escalation, systemic delay, and ineffective protection. For those studying or trying to prevent domestic violence, the Lasonya Agee case stands as a clear timeline of missed interventions. Even though Lasonya survived, the damage was permanent. Physically, emotionally, and socially, the consequences reshaped her life and the lives of everyone connected to her. What happened that day did not just represent a failed relationship. It revealed the deeper structural problems that allow such violence to continue even after warnings are issued. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.